Emma Roberts pressed her face against the cool train window and watched the green fields roll by like pages in a book she had read long ago. The rhythmic clicking of the train wheels matched the beating of her tired heart. At 28 years old, she felt like an old woman carrying the weight of 100 disappointments. Her handbag sat heavy on her lap, filled with papers that told the story of her broken life. The divorce documents were still warm from the lawyer's printer, and the ink seemed to burn through the folder. Her bank statement showed numbers that made her feel sick to her stomach. After paying the lawyer and splitting everything with her ex-husband, she barely had enough money left to buy groceries for a month. The train began to slow down as it approached Meadow Valley Station. Emma had not been to this small English village since she was 12 years old, visiting her grandmother during summer holidays. Back then, everything seemed magical and full of possibilities. Now, at 28, she was coming back not as a happy child, but as a broken woman with nowhere else to go. Her grandmother Rose had died 6 months ago, leaving Emma the small cottage where she had lived for 40 years. Emma's mother had suggested selling it immediately, but Emma had been too busy trying to save her marriage to think about it. Now that her marriage was over and her life in London had crumbled like old bread, the cottage was her only hope. Maybe she could sell it and use the money to start fresh somewhere far away. Maybe she could finally learn to breathe again without feeling like she was drowning. The station at Meadow Valley was tiny, with only one platform and a small wooden building that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Emma stepped off the train carrying one suitcase and a heart full of sadness. The air smelled different here, clean and sweet. Nothing like the polluted air of London. She could hear birds singing in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of flowing water. The walk to her grandmother's cottage took her through the main street of the village. The old stone houses stood in neat rows like faithful guards, watching over the quiet streets. Their windows sparkled in the afternoon sun, and many had flower boxes filled with bright colors. Everything looked exactly as she remembered it, as if time had decided to move slowly in this peaceful place. The river Clearbrook ran right through the heart of the village, its clear water singing an ancient song as it flowed over smooth stones. Emma remembered how her grandmother used to say that the river had been there for thousands of years, watching over the people of Meadow Valley like a kind guardian. As a child, Emma had believed every word. Now, as an adult, she wished she could still believe in guardians and magic. Grandmother Rose's cottage sat at the end of a narrow lane, surrounded by a garden that had grown wild without a loving care. The roses she had planted were still blooming, but weeds had taken over most of the flower beds. Emma found the front door key exactly where her grandmother had always kept it, under the smiling garden gnome by the front step. Some things, at least, never changed inside the cottage. Dust particles danced in the golden afternoon sunlight that streamed through the lace curtains. Everything smelled of lavender and old memories. Emma's grandmother had dried lavender from her garden every summer and hung it in small bundles round the house. The scent brought back memories of warm hugs, homemade cookies, and bedtime stories about brave princesses and kind dragons. Emma dropped her suitcase in the small living room and sat down in her grandmother's favorite chair. The silence felt heavy round her. For the first time in months, she was completely alone with her thoughts, and they were not kind companions. Her marriage had failed because she had not been good enough. Her job had ended because the company said they did not need her anymore. Even her friends in London had slowly disappeared when her life became too complicated and sad. As evening approached, Emma felt suffocated by the quiet cottage and her dark thoughts. She needed air, she needed space, she needed to move. Without thinking about where she was going, she walked out of the cottage and found herself heading toward the river. Her feet seemed to remember the path from her childhood visits. The river Clearbrook looked different in the evening light. The water was moving faster than usual, swollen with spring rains that had fallen for days. Emma stood on the bank, watching the current rush past, carrying leaves and small branches downstream. The water was so clear she could see the stones on the bottom, smooth and grey like sleeping animals' dots. As she stood there thinking about how her life had fallen apart piece by piece, Emma stepped closer to the water's edge. The stones were wet and slippery from the rain. She was thinking about her ex-husband's cruel words, about the job she had lost, about the future that looked so dark and uncertain. She was thinking about how tired she was of fighting, of trying, of hoping for things to get better. Her foot slipped on the wet stones. The shock of the cold water hit her like a physical blow. The river Clearbrook was much deeper than it looked, and the current was incredibly strong. Emma felt herself being pulled downstream, the water closing over her head, for just a moment. As the river carried her away from the bank, she stopped, fighting. Maybe this was how her story was meant to end. Maybe she was just too tired to keep trying. But then she felt strong arms wrap around her, pulling her toward safety. A voice called out through the rushing water. "Hold on. I've got you." The water was everywhere around Emma, cold and dark and pulling her down like invisible hands. She could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the river carrying her away from everything. Her lungs burned and her clothes felt heavy like stones. Just when she thought she might disappear forever under the rushing water, strong arms wrapped round her chest and pulled her upward toward the light. The man who saved her was tall and lean, with shoulders broad enough to carry heavy burdens. His brown eyes were the color of warm earth, and his hands were rough and callous from years of hard work. Water dripped from his dark hair as he dragged Emma to the riverbank, both of them breathing hard from the effort. His clothes were completely soaked. But he did not seem to care about himself at all. "You are safe now," he said in a gentle voice. That reminded Emma of her grandfather reading bedtime stories. His accent was local, with the soft sounds of someone who had lived in the countryside all his life. Without asking any questions, he took off his thick woolen jacket and wrapped it round Emma's shivering shoulders. The jacket smelled like hay and horses and something clean like fresh air. Emma sat on the wet grass, her whole body shaking from cold and shock. She could not stop her teeth from chattering, and her wet clothes clung to her skin like ice. The man moved quickly and quietly, gathering dry sticks and leaves from under the nearby trees. Within minutes, he had built a small fire that crackled and danced, sending warm light across their faces. Emma had never seen anyone make a fire so fast and so easily, as if he had done it 1,000 times before. "I am sorry," Emma whispered, her voice so quiet she could barely hear it herself above the sound of the crackling flames. "I did not mean to fall in. I just—" She stopped talking because she did not know how to explain what had happened. How could she tell this stranger that for a moment she had stopped fighting the water? How could she say that part of her had wanted to let the river carry her away from all her problems? "No need to explain anything," the man said softly, feeding another stick to the fire. "We all have days when the current feels too strong to fight against." He spoke like someone who understood about currents and rivers, both the kind made of water and the kind made of life's troubles. As they sat by the warm fire, Emma looked at her rescuer more carefully. He was probably in his early 30s, with lines round his eyes that came from squinting in the sun and worrying about things that mattered. His hands were strong and gentle, the kind of hands that could calm a frightened animal or fix a broken fence. There was something peaceful about him, like a deep lake that looks calm on the surface but holds many secrets underneath. "My name is James Fletcher," he said, stirring the fire with a long stick. "I run the horse farm just outside the village. I was riding back from checking the fences when I heard the splash. He did not say it like he was a hero. He said it like helping people was just something he did, as natural as breathing. Emma told him her name and explained that she had inherited her grandmother's cottage. She did not tell him about the divorce or the money problems or how lost she felt, but somehow, as they talked quietly by the fire, she learned about his life without even asking. His words came slowly, like someone who was used to spending time alone and was not in the habit of talking about personal things. James had been taking care of his elderly mother for 3 years. Ever since she started forgetting simple things, like where she put her keys or what day it was, the sickness in her mind was getting worse, and some days she did not remember who he was at all. The farm was struggling because he could not leave his mother alone for long periods, and he had to pay for expensive medicine and special care. The weight of all these responsibilities showed in the tired lines round his eyes, but he never complained or asked for pity. The horses help, he said, watching the flames dance between them. When everything else feels complicated, they keep things simple. They do not care about money or worry about tomorrow. They just need food and water and someone to treat them with kindness. Emma found herself asking, "Why did you help me? You do not even know me." She was genuinely curious because in London, most people would have called the police or an ambulance, not jumped into a dangerous river themselves. James looked across the fire at the river Clearbrook, still rushing past them in the darkness. Then he looked back at Emma with those kind brown eyes, because sometimes saving someone else is the only way to save yourself. He said simply, "We are all fighting our own currents. When we help each other, we both become stronger swimmers." The fire was burning low now, and Emma's clothes were starting to dry. James made sure the flames were completely out before he walked her back to her grandmother's cottage. The village was quiet and dark, with only a few lights glowing in windows like friendly stars. Their footsteps echoed softly on the stone streets. At her front door, James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. He wrote his phone number on it with a pencil stub that looked like he used it for making notes about farm work. "If you need anything at all, or if you just want to talk to someone, please call me," he said, pressing the paper into her hand. "Sometimes the hardest thing about troubles is going through them alone. You do not have to do that." That night, for the first time in many months, Emma slept deeply and peacefully. She could not understand why she felt safe in the small cottage, but she did. Maybe it was knowing that somewhere nearby lived a man who would jump into a river to save her. Stranger, the morning after James saved her from the river, Emma woke up feeling different. The sun was streaming through her grandmother's lace curtains, and for the first time in months, she did not feel that heavy weight pressing down on her chest. She made herself a cup of tea and sat in the small kitchen, thinking about the kind man who had pulled her from the water. Without really planning it, she found herself walking toward his farm. Fletcher Farm sat on a gentle hill just outside Meadow Valley, surrounded by green fields that rolled away like a soft blanket. Emma could see horses grazing peacefully in the pastures, their tails swishing away flies in the warm morning air. The farmhouse was old but well kept, painted white with blue shutters that looked freshly cleaned. A wooden fence ran round the property, and everything looked neat and cared for despite the money troubles James had mentioned. James was in the barn when Emma arrived, marking out stalls with a pitchfork. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and smiled, his face lighting up like someone had turned on a lamp inside him. He was wearing old jeans and a work shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and there were bits of hay in his dark hair. "I came to thank you properly," Emma said, feeling suddenly shy, "and to see if you needed any help round here. James leaned the pitchfork against the barn wall and wiped his hands on a rag. "You do not owe me any thanks," he said, "but I would be grateful for the company. It gets quiet here sometimes." That first day, Emma helped him feed the horses and clean their stalls. The work was harder than anything she had done in her office job in London, but it felt good to use her hands and her muscles. The horses were gentle and curious, sniffing at her hair and pockets. Looking for treats, James introduced her to each, one by name, telling her their personalities and quirks like they were old friends. Day after day, Emma found herself returning to the farm. There was something healing about being round the animals and the quiet countryside. The horses did not care that her marriage had failed or that she had lost her job. They only cared that she brought them carrots and spoke to them in a soft voice. James never asked too many questions about her past. But when she was ready to talk, he listened with the same patience he showed his animals. One afternoon, as they groomed Daisy, a gentle brown mare with kind eyes, Emma finally told James about her broken life. "My marriage fell apart," she said, running the brush through Daisy's silky mane. "My husband said I was boring and that I never wanted to do anything exciting. Then I lost my job because the company was cutting costs. Everything I thought I had built just crumbled like a house made of sand." James nodded, continuing to brush the horse's coat in long, gentle strokes. "I know that feeling," he said quietly. "When my father died 5 years ago, I thought I would lose the farm. The bank wanted their money, and I had no idea how to run this place by myself. I felt like I was failing everyone who depended on me. My mother, the animals, even my father's memory." Emma stopped brushing and looked at him. "How did you get through it?" she asked. James was quiet for a moment, thinking carefully about his answer. "One day at a time," he said finally, and by realizing that starting over is not the same as giving up. Sometimes starting fresh is the bravest thing a person can do. As the weeks passed, Emma began helping round the farm more and more. She learned to mend fences with wire and wooden posts, to stack hay bales in the barn, and to recognize when an animal was feeling sick or sad. Her hands, once soft from years of office work, grew stronger and more capable. Her mind, once clouded with worry and self-doubt, began to clear like a window being cleaned. James showed her how to train the younger horses, teaching them to trust humans and follow simple commands. "It is all about patience and consistency," he explained as they worked with a young colt named Thunder. "You cannot force trust. You have to earn it, little by little, day by day." Emma found that working with the horses was teaching her things about herself. She was more patient than she had ever imagined, and she was stronger than her ex-husband had made her believe. Where Thunder finally let her brush his neck without pulling away, she felt prouder than she had after any promotion at her old job. In the evenings, after the farm work was done, Emma and James would sit by the river Clearbrook and talk about their dreams. The same river that had nearly claimed her life now seemed like an old friend, its gentle sounds creating a peaceful background to their conversations. James told her about his plans to expand the farm to help troubled young people through horse therapy programs. He believed that working with animals could heal hearts and minds in ways that regular medicine could not. Emma found herself imagining a different kind of future than she had ever considered before. Instead of returning to London and looking for another office job, she began to picture herself staying in Meadow Valley. Maybe she could start a small business. Perhaps a bed and breakfast in her grandmother's cottage, or a shop selling handmade crafts from local artists. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the water, Emma surprised herself by saying, "The river does not look so frightening anymore." James smiled, his brown eyes warm in the golden light. "That is because you are not running from it anymore," he said. "You are learning to work with its flow instead of fighting against it." Emma realized he was right. She was no longer the scared, broken woman who had fallen into the water weeks ago. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who could face whatever currents life might bring. Emma was feeding the chickens behind James's farmhouse when she saw the postman walking up the lane with a thick envelope in his hand. Her heart sank immediately because she recognized the expensive letterhead of her ex-husband's lawyer. For weeks now, she had been feeling happy and hopeful, working on the farm and building something real with James. But the sight of that official envelope brought all her old fears rushing back like flood. She took the letter with shaking hands and read it twice before the words fully sank in. Her ex-husband, Richard, was demanding his legal share of her grandmother's cottage. According to his lawyer, because Emma had inherited the property during their marriage, half of its value belonged to him. The letter was cold and businesslike, full of legal terms that made Emma's head spin. But the message was clear. She would have to sell the cottage and give Richard half the money, or face a long and expensive court battle. Emma walked slowly back to the farmhouse, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Just that morning, she had been making plans to turn the cottage into a small bed and breakfast. She had been imagining a future in Meadow Valley, a life built around simple pleasures and honest work. Now all of that seemed to be crumbling away. Like sand through her fingers, she found James in the kitchen, staring at his own piece of bad news. The bank had sent notice that his farm's mortgage payment would increase by nearly double. Starting next month, rising interest rates and his late payments from the previous year had caught up with him. His face was pale, and his hands were clenched into fists on the wooden table. "Maybe this is a sign," Emma said, sinking into the chair across from him. She spread her legal papers next to his bank documents, creating a landscape of troubles. Between them, maybe I should just sell everything and move far away, start completely over somewhere else, where nobody can find me. James was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at his horses grazing in the field. Emma could see him thinking, working through the problem like he worked through training a difficult horse, slowly and carefully, looking for the right approach. Running away's easy. He said finally, his voice steady but tired, "But you are stronger than you were when you first came here. Do not let fear make you forget that. You have grown so much these past weeks. Do not throw that away because of some papers from London." Emma wanted to believe him, but the fear was stronger than her hope. What if we both lose everything? What if I have to give up the cottage and you lose the farm? What if we end up with nothing? James reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Then we will start again, together. But let us not give up before we even try to fight." That evening, dark clouds began gathering over Meadow Valley like an army preparing for a battle. The wind picked up, bending the trees and sending leaves swirling through the air. By night time, rain was falling in heavy sheets, drumming against the windows and turning the farmyard into a muddy lake. Emma was staying at the farmhouse, helping James keep watch over his animals, when they heard the emergency sirens wailing through the village. The river Clearbrook, swollen with rainwater from the hills, had risen beyond its banks and was threatening the houses on the low ground near the village centre. Without thinking twice, Emma and James put on their raincoats and boots and hurried into the storm. The village was in chaos, with people running through the streets carrying suitcases and calling for their pets. The river, usually so peaceful and gentle, had become a raging monster, brown with mud and debris, rushing through streets that had Never seen flood water before. Emma and James worked side by side through the long, dark night. They helped Mrs. Patterson, the elderly lady who lived next to the post office, evacuate her 6 cats to higher ground. The old woman was crying out, confused, and Emma held her hand while James carried the cat carriers one by one to safety. They filled sandbags for the Thompson family, whose house sat right next to the river bank, working in the rain until their backs ached and their hands were raw all night long. Emma carried hot tea and sandwiches to the volunteers who were working to save the village. She helped set up a shelter in the village hall for people whose houses had been flooded. She comforted crying children and helped their parents find dry clothes and warm blankets. Every muscle in her body hurt, and her clothes were soaked through with rain and mud. But she felt more alive and useful than she had in years. As dawn broke over Meadow Valley, Emma stood in James's kitchen, looking like she had been through a war. Her hair was plastered to her head with rainwater. Her clothes were stained with mud, and she was so tired she could barely stand. But her eyes were bright with something that had been missing for a long time. Purpose. I want to stay, she said suddenly, the words coming out before she had even thought them through. Not just in Meadow Valley, but here, with you. Whatever problems we face with the lawyers and the banks and everything else, I want to face them together. James crossed the small kitchen into quick steps and took her muddy hands in his. Are you sure? He asked, searching her face. It will not always be easy. There will be more storms, more troubles. I cannot promise you a life without problems. Emma looked into his kind brown eyes and felt something settle into place inside her heart. Like a puzzle piece finding its proper spot. Easy is not what I need, she said firmly. I need real. I need purpose. I need someone who will work beside me when the storms come. I need you. Outside, the rain was finally stopping, and the first rays of sunlight were breaking through the clouds, turning the flood water into gold. 6 months had passed since the terrible storm that nearly destroyed Meadow Valley, and the village looked more beautiful than ever. The houses that had been damaged by the flood water were now repaired and painted fresh colors. Gardens that had been washed away were replanted with new flowers that bloomed brighter than before. Even the river Clearbrook seemed gentler, as if it had learned to behave itself after causing so much trouble. Emma stood in front of the mirror in her grandmother's cottage, adjusting the simple white dress she had chosen for her wedding day. It was not an expensive gown like the one she had worn for her first wedding in London. This dress was plain and practical, something she could wear again for special occasions in the years to come. But when she looked at herself, she saw something in her eyes that had never been there before. A quiet happiness that came from deep inside her heart. The cottage had changed completely over the past months. Emma had turned it into a small bed and breakfast called Rose Cottage. Named after her grandmother, the rooms were clean and comfortable, decorated with flowers from the garden and quilts made by local women. Guests came from all over England to stay at Rose Cottage and experience James's host therapy program at Fletcher Farm. The business was small but growing, bringing in enough money to pay the bills and save a little for the future. Outside the cottage, Emma could hear people gathering by the river Clearbrook for the wedding ceremony. She had chosen to be married by the same water that had nearly taken her life, because that river had also brought her the greatest love she had ever known. Through the window, she could see James standing with the village priest, wearing his best suit and looking nervous but happy. His mother sat in the front row of chairs, having one of her good days when she remembered everything clearly and could enjoy the celebration. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly lady with the 6 cats, knocked softly on the cottage door. She had become Emma's closest friend in the village, and today she carried a beautiful bouquet of flowers from her own garden, The bouquet was made of white roses, purple lavender, and yellow daffodils tied together with a blue ribbon that matched the color of James's eyes. "You look lovely, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, tears gathering in her wrinkled eyes. "Your grandmother Rose would have been so proud to see you today. She always said this cottage was meant to be filled with love and laughter." Emma hugged the old woman carefully, trying not to crush the flowers. "Thank you for everything," she whispered, "for the flowers, for helping with the cottage, for being such a good friend. I do not know what I would have done without you." The walk from the cottage to the river took only a few minutes, but for Emma it felt like a journey through her entire life. She passed the spot where she had first met James, when he had pulled her from the cold water with his strong arms. She walked by the farm where she had learned to care for horses and discovered that she was braver than she had ever imagined. Every step brought back memories of the months that had changed her from a broken, frightened woman into someone who could face any storm. The whole village had gathered for the wedding ceremony. The Thompson family sat together in the second row, their children cleaned and dressed in their finest clothes. Mr. Thompson had fully recovered from the flood damage to his house, and his wife had baked the wedding cake as a gift for Emma and James. The baker, the postman, the doctor, and dozens of other neighbors filled the chairs that had been set up along the riverbank. As Emma walked toward James, she saw him smile with his whole face, his brown eyes shining like stars. The village priest began the simple ceremony with words about love and commitment and the importance of community. Emma and James had written their own vows, speaking from their hearts about the journey that had brought them together. "I promise to stand beside you through every storm," Emma said, her voice clear and strong. "I promise to work with you too, build something beautiful, something that will help other people find hope when they have lost their way." James took her hands in his calloused farmer's hands and spoke his vows in return. "I promise to be your safe harbor when the currents of life become too strong. I promise to love you not just on the easy days, but especially on the hard days when we need each other most," as they exchanged simple gold rings. Emma thought about that dark evening when she had fallen into the river. She had been drowning then, not just in water but in despair and loneliness. She had felt worthless and broken, like something that could never be repaired. She had believed that her life was over, that she had nothing left to offer the world. Now, looking into James's eyes and feeling the warmth of their community surrounding them like a protective blanket, Emma understood something important. Sometimes a person has to sink all the way to the bottom before they can learn how to swim properly. Sometimes everything has to fall apart before it can be built back together in a better way. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Emma gently while the whole village cheered and clapped. Children threw flower petals into the air, and Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "The river brought us together," James whispered in Emma's ear as they hugged. "No," Emma whispered back, looking at the flowing water that sparkled in the afternoon sunshine. "It brought us home." After the ceremony, as the sun began to set over Meadow Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emma threw her bouquet toward the river as tradition demanded, but instead of landing in the water and floating away, the flowers caught on a low branch that hung over the riverbank. The bouquet hung there like a beautiful promise, proof that good things can take root and grow in the most unexpected places. The river Clear Brook continued its ancient song, flowing peacefully through the heart of the village. It carried with it the story of two damaged souls who had learned that saving each other was really about saving themselves, and that sometimes the deepest waters lead to the safest shores at the end.